And so all of our rights, one by one, will be taken away. Our right to free speech, our right to freedom of the press, our right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, our right to peaceably assemble, our right to keep and bear arms, our right to due process under the law. One by one, they will go down the list and their crackdown will begin. And the result of it, if they succeed, will be utter tyranny. We are 13 days until Election Day, and the Democrats released their October surprise, but it's not a very good one. What it is, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, a man by the name of Jeffrey Goldberg, published an article yesterday. This is the title of the article. The headline says, Trump, as if he's quoting Trump, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. And the subtitle of the article says, the Republican nominee's preoccupation with dictators and his disdain for the American military is deepening. Within this article, there are essentially two accusations. And we're going to go through these because, like I said, this isn't a very well done October surprise. Today's show, by the way, is sponsored by First Cup Coffee. You can go to firstcup.com and use my promo code Liz for 10% off your order. That's firstcup.com, promo code Liz. So the two accusations that are contained within this October surprise Atlantic article, the first one is about a woman named Vanessa Guillen. Vanessa Guillen was a U.S. Army soldier who was based at Fort Hood in Texas, and she was brutally murdered there by another soldier and his girlfriend. It's a horrendous story. You probably remember it. We were all following with bated breath because her body wasn't found for 2 months following her disappearance. It was an absolutely horrendous story. Well, Jeffrey Goldberg alleges within this article that Trump met with a family of Vanessa Guillen and offered to pay for her funeral because she was at first categorized as not having died in the line of duty. The military would not necessarily pay for that funeral. Well, the allegation that Jeffrey Goldberg finds to be so salacious is he claims that Trump became angry about how much the funeral ultimately cost. And this is a quote that he attributes to Trump, although we will see in just a moment why it probably wasn't said by Trump. But the quote is, it doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. This is what Jeffrey Goldberg is claiming or accusing Trump of saying. Now, is this true? If this were true, this would be a big deal because that would be disrespectful. You could argue that it would be racist, but it's already been debunked. Less than 18 hours after this article had been published on The Atlantic, Vanessa's sister, Myra, came out and said the following, and I'm going to show you here on the screen what she said. I'm going to read this to you. She said, wow. I don't appreciate how you, and this is a response to The Atlantic directly, are exploiting my sister's death for politics. It's hurtful and disrespectful to the important changes she made for service members. President Donald Trump did nothing but show respect to my family and to Vanessa. In fact, Myra says, I voted for President Trump today. So keep in mind that this allegation that Donald Trump was angry about the cost of this funeral was reported by Jeffrey Goldberg based on what? Who said that President Trump made that comment? Well, Jeffrey Goldberg relies on an anonymous source. So this person wouldn't go on the record if this person even exists. Maybe this is completely fabricated. And it seems like it might be based on the fact that not only did Myra, Vanessa's sister, contest this allegation, but the attorney for the family also said, and I quote, her name's Natalie Kawam. She says, after having dealt with hundreds of reporters in my legal career, this is unfortunately the first time I have to go on record and call out Jeffrey Goldberg at The Atlantic. Not only did he misrepresent our conversation, but he outright lied in his sensational story. More importantly, he used and exploited my clients and Vanessa Guillen's murder for cheap political gain. So that's two people now on the record who are saying that Jeffrey Goldberg is lying. Vanessa's sister and Vanessa's family attorney. Then, of course, we have Trump's chief of staff at the time was Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows said, I was in the discussions featured in The Atlantic's latest hit piece against President Trump. Let me say this. Any suggestion that President Trump disparaged Ms. Guillen or refused to pay for her funeral expenses is absolutely false. He was nothing but kind, gracious, and wanted to make sure that the military and the U.S. government did right by Vanessa Guillen and her family. So now we have three on the record sources who were there at the time. The family and the attorney were there when Trump spoke to them directly, and Mark Meadows was there at conversations behind the scenes who are contesting Jeffrey Goldberg's article. And then we have a fourth. We have a man named Theo Wold, who posted on X and said, I was at President Trump's meeting with the Guillen family because I assisted with translation that day. President Trump was genuinely concerned about Vanessa Guillen and appalled by the tragedy the Guillen family were enduring. The sister, Myra, was poised and confident in advocating for her sister. Then, And she's right again today. The Atlantic hit piece is a lie. For example, President Trump had zero interest in the cameras. He met with the Guillen family privately for 20 minutes and offered the press gaggle solely if it would assist them in honoring Army Specialist Guillen and raising awareness about her case. He even told me that day that the press are vipers. Boy, was President Trump right. How much money do you have in your wallet right now? Count it. You've always been able to feel confident that that money is worth something. It's called fiat currency. It's not, paper money isn't worth something in and of itself. It's worth something because we trust the US government to back this currency. But what if this is no longer the case? What if we have paper money in our wallet and we hold it and its value is nothing? What if we lose everything that we've worked for, everything that we've earned, everything that we've saved? This, I'm afraid, is the situation that we're facing in the United States right now. The US dollar is under attack. It's facing unprecedented inflation based on or because of politicians overspending our money. Our political environment is, I don't need to tell you this, 13 days before the election, becoming increasingly unstable. And our federal government, or the Democratic operatives within the federal government, especially the deep state, are colluding with the United Nations to take over control of our money by switching from fiat currency to a digital dollar. We know what happens when governments are in charge of a digital dollar. They use it to control their population. This is why it has never been more important than for you and I to take control over our wealth so this doesn't happen to us. Don't let your life savings become a casualty of either failing banks, currency wars, or politicians who seek to control us. Now is the time to call the only precious metal dealer that I trust, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings, your retirement accounts, by diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. That's something that the government can't just take away from you. They can't devalue gold and silver the way that they could a fiat currency. American Hartford Gold, by the way, supports content like this that is committed to bringing you the truth. So if you tell them that I sent you, they will give you up to $15,000 of free silver on that first order that you make. Call them now. Click the link in the description of this episode, or you could call the phone number 866-996-5172. That's 866-996-5172. Or you can text my name, Liz, to 998899. Again, the phone number is 866-996-5172, or you can text Liz to 998899. So, again, Jeffrey Goldberg makes a salacious claim based on an anonymous source, and then four on the record sources debunk this claim. It's absolutely awful. It also contradicts President Trump's history of how he's taken care of military service members. That's the first allegation, which is pretty easily dispensed with. The second allegation in the article is even more salacious. Jeffrey Goldberg contends that Donald Trump wanted the kind of generals that Hitler had. This is the quote from the article. Quote, "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had," Trump said in a private conversation in the White House, according to two people who heard him say this. People who were totally loyal to him, that follow orders. So again, you'll notice something about just that sentence. According to two people who heard him say this. Who are these two people? Well, they're not quoted directly. They're anonymous sources. They're hiding their names. And here's the thing that struck me when I read this article. If, in fact, Trump made a comment like that, which he most likely didn't, because there's no evidence that he made a comment like this, and this is the left's playbook, just always accusing Trump of being Hitler without any substantiation for it. If he said this years ago, how dare they keep this secret until 13 days before the election? How dare they be so cowardly to keep their names private if a president of the United States was actually embracing Hitler? Which, of course, he was not. About 7 paragraphs later in this article, Jeffrey Goldberg says this. In their book, The Divider, Trump in the White House, Peter Baker and Susan Glasser reported that Trump asked John Kelly, his chief of staff at the time, "Why can't you be like the German generals?" Trump at various points had grown frustrated with military officials he deemed disloyal and disobedient. So the source for that claim is John Kelly himself. Now, here's where we get to John Kelly, the chief of staff, and then we'll get to whether Jeffrey Goldberg and The Atlantic are reliable sources. So John Kelly himself is a liar. You might remember 4 years ago when there was another Jeffrey Goldberg piece in The Atlantic that accused President Trump of calling U.S. military service members who died fighting wars for the United States, he called them suckers and losers. And this was a really salacious story at the time. People were horrified if Trump would have said something like that. We honor those who died for our country. We don't disparage them. Well, it turns out, of course, that John Kelly was the source for that article. He was the one who claimed that Trump called dead U.S. service members suckers and losers, but it wasn't true. John Kelly's chief of staff, a guy named Zach Fuentes, went on the record and said, I was in the room when this conversation happened, and that quote that John Kelly is claiming President Trump made was never said. This is just an outright lie. So that tells us, of course, that John Kelly himself is a liar. If you have lied and you've been proven to be a liar, your lie has been debunked, then you are not a reliable source. Anything that you say forevermore should be questioned. You should never be assumed to be a credible person. So John Kelly, of course, is a liar. He's been proved to be a liar, and therefore he is not a credible source. We don't take him at face value because he has lied for this exact purpose before, to try to take down Trump. That's the first thing. Then we have Jeffrey Goldberg himself. Jeffrey Goldberg himself is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. The Atlantic is owned by a Kamala Harris donor. So what might the motivation of The Atlantic be to disparage Trump? Because the owner of The Atlantic wants Kamala Harris to win the presidency. So that in and of itself should make you question this political hit piece. Secondly, Jeffrey Goldberg, I should say, Jeffrey Goldberg's own history with the truth is a history of not telling the truth. He's the one who published that debunked suckers and losers story, which means if he reported what John Kelly said without asking other people in the room who ultimately, as I said, debunked it, without asking these other people whether it was true, then he's not a journalist. He's a propagandist who disguises himself as a journalist. He published that. But then if you travel even a little bit further back and look at Jeffrey Goldberg's history, read, for example, what he wrote around the time of the Iraq War, the invasion of Iraq. And I'm talking about the second invasion of Iraq, when George Bush the Younger invaded Iraq after he'd invaded Afghanistan. Who was one of the biggest propagators of the weapons of mass destruction narrative that was the pretext for Bush invading Iraq? Well, it was Jeffrey Goldberg. Jeffrey Goldberg was the biggest propagator of the weapons of mass destruction lie. It wasn't true. Saddam Hussein didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. They never found any. In fact, it was later reported that Bush wasn't just misled by his intelligence communities, and therefore he wasn't responsible for the decision to invade Iraq. It was the intelligence communities that were responsible for telling the lie. No, there was one guy, and Molly Hemingway reports on this in her book, which you should read. There was one guy from Iraq whose brother had been murdered by Saddam Hussein, which means he had personal animosity towards Saddam Hussein, which is fine, by the way. Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator and a bad guy, and I'm not sad that he's gone, and nobody should be sad that he's gone. But this guy was motivated, this so-called source, the CIA source, was motivated to lie against Saddam Hussein because he wanted the U.S. military to invade Iraq. He wanted the U.S. military to topple the Saddam Hussein regime, and so he lied, and the CIA didn't verify this. They just took one guy whose brother had been murdered by Saddam Hussein and presented this to George W. Bush as if it was the truth. So you have this situation then where George W. Bush invades Iraq based on either blind faith in his CIA, which makes him beyond naive. I mean, this is negligence, like criminal negligence. Or you have him lying to the American people and pretending that this source was better than it was and more widespread than it was in order to invade Iraq because he wanted to invade Iraq because his vice president was Dick Cheney, who was tied, of course, to the military-industrial complex and wanted to profit off of warmongering. This is Jeffrey Goldberg, one of the biggest propagators of the weapon of mass destruction narrative. So on every level, this hit piece, which again was the Democrats' attempt at an October surprise, and it's just not a very good one because The Atlantic is compromised by being owned by a Kamala donor. Jeffrey Goldberg is compromised by propagating weapons of mass destructive narrative and publishing lies, the suckers and losers narrative. And then in this particular article, even if you take all of that context aside, which is basically impossible, but just do it for a second for the sake of argument. Even if you put all of those things aside, this article published yesterday, has already been roundly debunked. It's been debunked by the family of the Army soldier who Jeffrey Goldberg claims Trump disparaged. Everyone who was in that room said Trump never said anything disparaging against this woman. He was only sympathetic and compassionate and wanted to honor her. And then this comment that Donald Trump wanted German Hitler generals. This is anonymously sourced, which means it's unreliable, reported by an unreliable journalist. And anybody who was in the room said, no, this didn't happen. This didn't happen whatsoever. John Kelly, the only person who said anything about, John Kelly's the only person who's reported this, is unreliable because he hates Trump. All right, guys, there's a lot of hazards on the internet these days. Going online unprotected is basically like leaving your front door unlocked when you leave your house. And I don't think that any of us would do that. Even if we would have done it in the past, it's simply not safe to do that anymore. And maybe you trust some of your neighbors. That's good. I trust some of mine. But what about that creepy guy down the block? What about newcomers that you don't know who haven't integrated or assimilated into the community? What about random strangers? Do you trust all of them? Of course you don't. With ExpressVPN, you can stay safe online without having to trust any of these random strangers whose motivations you're unsure about. Every time that you connect on the internet to an unencrypted network, so in cafes, hotels, airports, your online data is not secured. Any hacker on the same network can gain access to and steal your personal data. I'm talking passwords, bank logins, credit card details. And it actually, believe it or not, doesn't take much technical knowledge to hack someone. It's not a situation anymore where you have to be the highest tech genius to hack into a computer. Not really. Just some cheap hardware is needed. Honestly, a smart 12-year-old could do it. Your data, by the way, is very valuable. Hackers are motivated to steal it from you because they can make up to $1,000 per person selling your personal information on the dark web. ExpressVPN stops hackers from doing this, from stealing your data, by creating a secure encrypted tunnel between your device, whether it's your phone or your computer, and the internet. ExpressVPN is the best because it is super secure and it's really easy to use. You don't have to be a tech genius yourself to use it. It works well on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, and so much more. You can stay secure on the go, and it's just one button here. I use ExpressVPN whenever I do show prep or talk to sources. My privacy and my family's privacy is extremely important to me, both personally and professionally. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/Liz. That's expressvpn.com/Liz. And you can get an extra 3 months free if you use this URL, expressvpn.com/Liz. That's expressvpn.com/Liz. So, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a very good October surprise. It's actually funny because October surprises aren't really October surprises anymore because of early voting. It used to be that in the lead up to election day, both campaigns would drop some really devastating report on their opposition, hoping that it would change how people vote. But think about how many people have cast their ballots already. I myself early voted this week, and I hope that you will too. Kind of felt weird, by the way, to early vote because I prefer an election day, but I know how important it is to cast our ballots early. Even if we want election day, even if we disagree with election season, the Democrats are competing by the rules of election season. And if we don't compete by the same rules, then we're going to lose before election day even hits. So if you haven't cast your ballot already, go do it. It saves Republicans a lot of money because then they don't have to try to turn you out to vote. They know you've already voted. And it also helps with the excitement around voting. It tampers down the excitement of Democrats if they know that Republicans are outpacing them. So jump in, be part of the crowd, get into the game, compete with the Democrats, cast your early vote. But the point of all of this is that October surprises aren't really as much of a thing as they used to be. And so this attempt by the Democrats just isn't going to hit home. It's interesting, not only are October surprises not a thing, they've misread the public. So even if October surprises were effective, this one wouldn't be. Because 5 years ago, when that first Jeffrey Goldberg article dropped saying that Trump had said that those who died for our country were suckers and losers, people had more respect for the upper echelon of the military generals, the military brass, because we believed that these people were the most courageous, the most skilled, had sacrificed and served our country. And sometimes that's true. But now, 5 years later, people understand that actually a lot of these military generals, the upper echelons of the military brass are woke. Mark Milley, think about Mark Milley. He thinks critical race theory and transing people, that's appropriate at the top level of the military. He actually is an advocate for DEI in the military. I mean, it's all the disgusting wokeness in the military is from these guys. So it's not like we see a quote from John Kelly, military general, and we say, oh, he must be the most truthful man out there because he's an honorable general. Like, no, we know that they're woke. And so we actually don't take their word for it, and you shouldn't either. And then for better or for worse, the voting public also, and you can make an argument that we shouldn't conflate the two things. You'd probably be correct, but human nature isn't perfect. People associate the military with forever wars. And there, as you know, has been a 180 in the mindset of the American public from our rah for the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war. Now we realize that we'd largely been duped, especially when it comes to the Iraq war, and that a lot of these politicians are just making money off of staging forever wars. People are against this. They don't want to go to war with Ukraine. They don't want to go to war with Iran. They don't want to go to war with Russia. They don't want to die in a war just so that Dick Cheney and George Bush can put more money in their pockets. And here's where the perception is you can criticize the perception, but let me just tell you, it exists. The perception of forever wars should be, we should look at politicians who make the decision to send the US military into forever wars, and we should criticize the politicians who make those decisions. But oftentimes, people look at the actual military service members and associate them with the forever wars. And while this is not a connection that makes sense because the military members don't have any say over where they're sent and what they do, the American people aren't perfect. It's like what happened in Vietnam in the 1970s. People that disagreed with the Vietnam War took out their anger at politicians on the military service members. Again, you can say, Liz, that's totally wrong and it's a misperception and it's unfair. And I would say, yeah, it is. But I'm just telling you the reality of the situation. The reality is that people sometimes associate military members with forever wars. So there's not that same like, rah, thank you for your service attitude among most of the American voting public as there was 15 years ago when all of these guys were coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq. And we were like, let's find you jobs. Let's honor you. Let's have parades. Let's make sure your mental health is taken care of. The temperature of the public as it relates to our relationship or perception with the military has changed. So even if this article from Jeffrey Goldberg was true, which it's not on every level, this isn't going to land with the public anyway. In addition to that, people know that the Democrats hurling unfounded accusations that Trump is literally Hitler, this is what has led to assassination attempts. This is what led to the July 13th attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, of an assassin, a would-be assassin on the roof of a building, a warehouse nearby, firing a bullet that hit the president of the United States in his ear, causing him to bleed. We know that this type of assassination attempt was allowed by the negligence and incompetence of Secret Service, but the motivation for an assassin to attempt to murder the president is because of the Democrats' rhetoric, because he's called a dictator, an authoritarian. People are told that he is literally Hitler. That's why on the golf course, less than 2 months after that July 13th assassination attempt on Trump International, another assassin tried to kill the president of the United States and was fortunately stopped by Secret Service before he had an attempt or had an opportunity to fire bullets. But his motivation was the same. He hated Donald Trump. Why did he hate Donald Trump? Well, not because Donald Trump's a dictator. Donald Trump has been the president. We know how he's going to act in the Oval Office. But people believe what they hear. And they hear over and over from organizations like The Atlantic, from people like Jeffrey Goldberg, from woke military generals like Mark Milley and all of these people, and John Kelly, that Trump is literally Hitler. And they feel that their only recourse to stop a genocide against themselves is to kill Trump. But let me tell you, thank goodness for social media. Thank goodness for Elon Musk and X and free speech. And if not for X, maybe this would hit. Maybe this so-called October surprise, which just seems to me like a desperate attempt to hack Trump. They're unwilling to contend with Trump's policies and his record on the substance of the thing. And so they come after him with these, you're actually Hitler. You hate the military. Thank goodness for social media, because within 18 hours of this article being published, people who were actually there in meetings, willing to go on the record, debunked this. So it's not going to hit. Also, Mark Halperin, who works for Newsmax now, said that this story had been shopped to him before The Atlantic, and he passed by it. He said it was shopped to him by Democratic operatives, but it wasn't reliable, so he chose not to publish it. So what does that tell you? Why would these people, if this were true, wait until 13 days before the election? In fact, it would be downright evil if this were true, which it's not. But if it were, it would be evil to wait 13 days before the election instead of letting the American public know before that. There you go. My friends, this year's election is about so much more than just politics. It's about securing our borders. It's about protecting our communities where we live. It's about ensuring that when disasters strike, we have a government that actually shows up for its people. So first and foremost, on election day, please vote. But also on election night, you are going to want to be a member of Blaze TV so that you can join me and all the other Blaze TV hosts in our coverage of the 2024 presidential elections. We are at a crossroads. The future of our nation is being decided in real time right before our eyes. This is your chance to be part of something amazing. This election night, Blaze TV is going to have boots on the ground across the country with our correspondents delivering the pulse of the night straight from where the action is actually happening so that you know you are getting the truth. All you have to do is subscribe. You can experience this pivotal night with us. At Blaze TV, we speak the truth. No spins. No filters. Just real talk breaking down what's happening in real time. We'd like to have you with us. Just go to blazeelection.com/Liz and get $40 off. That's blazeelection.com/Liz for $40 off. I hope you join us. It's going to be a great night. I hope. Either way, go to blazeelection.com/Liz and you can get $40 off. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden, if you remember, he's actually still the president. Almost feels weird to say that at this point because he has so been banished from the public because Kamala Harris stole his position. Joe Biden admitted the Democrats' strategy to defeat Trump. He said that the Democrats' ultimate strategy is to lock Trump up. Take a listen.
He is talking about doing away with the entire Department of Education. He means it. This is not a joke. This is a guy who also wants to replace every civil servant, every single one. Thinks he has a right under the Supreme Court ruling on immunity to be able, if need be, if it was the case, to actually physically eliminate, shoot, kill someone who he believes to be a threat to him. I mean, so I know this sounds bizarre. It sounds like if I said this 5 years ago, you'd lock me up. We got to lock him up. Politically lock him up.
And by the way, this is the kind of rhetoric that feeds into assassination attempts as well, to pretend that President Trump could go and murder an American citizen on the streets of the United States and that he would have no accountability to the law. That's not true. By the way, there has been one president who has assassinated a American citizen without due process of law, and it wasn't Donald Trump. It was Barack Obama. Barack Obama killed an American citizen overseas in a drone attack because this American had colluded with radical Islamist terrorist groups overseas to plot and kill American citizens. And nobody except radical libertarians seemed to have a problem with that. No one said, oh my goodness, Barack Obama has committed a crime. Why? Because the Supreme Court was very clear in their ruling about immunity. A president can't do whatever he wants, but he can't be prosecuted while he's in office for an action that he took in the course of his official duty. So Barack Obama had the authority as president to fight against radical Islamist terrorists. So when he killed an American citizen who had defected from America and was a terrorist, that's why people didn't say anything. Well, he was the president. He was acting in the course of action. What should he have been? Should he have been indicted for murder of that American citizen? No, there's recourse if a president does something bad. The recourse is Congress removes him from office. That, of course, is what the Supreme Court was talking about, not Biden's ridiculous contention that Trump can murder anybody that he wants. But Biden here admitted the Democrats' strategy to defeat Trump. To weaponize the government is what Biden said Democrats are doing. To weaponize the law, to try to put Trump in prison. They don't want to stop him from becoming president. They don't want to defeat him at the ballot box. They want to totally destroy him as a person because he represents us. They want every person who votes for Trump, who supports for Trump, who's even thought a positive thought about Trump, to fear saying so, to fear acting by casting their ballot or acting by speaking in support. They want people to fear. And by the way, I know there are some people who think that the Democrats won't try to put Trump in prison, that they're just trying to entangle him in lawfare now in order to stymie his efforts to become president, to try to put a croquet mallet in the spokes of the wheels of his campaign, you might say. I don't think that's what they're doing. I think they will literally try to put him in prison. Because what's their argument? Oh, their argument is, well, what is Secret Service going to do to protect the former president if he's in Rikers? Well, do you think they care about where the Secret Service is going to stay if they're still supposed to protect Trump, but Trump is in a prison cell? They don't care about that at all. They know exactly what will happen if President Trump is put in prison. What will happen? Well, violence will happen. There will be violence on the streets of America. And I don't say this because I want this. I say this because it's what they want. It's what the Democrats want. You could call it their backup plan. If the Democrats aren't successful in subverting our culture to the point of revolution, if they can't successfully infiltrate our institutions to the point of revolution, if they can't indoctrinate the American public successfully enough through biased media and public schools and Hollywood and social media, then they will enact their emergency plan, you could call it. They've actually been preparing for it. All the lawfare against Trump wasn't just so that they could insult him by saying Donald Trump is a convicted felon. The purpose of this lawfare was to prepare for the day that they decide they want a violent revolution. The minute they put Trump in prison, they know that some idiot will commit violence. He shouldn't, but somebody will. Somebody who is righteously indignant that Trump is being unfairly imprisoned by his political opponent because of his political views will act out in a way that he shouldn't and commit violence. And what will the left do at that moment? Well, that's the moment they've been waiting for. They will use that moment as their vanguard. They will use that moment, that violence, as justification for cracking down on us. Because they say, well, your speech turned into violence, so you won't be allowed to use your speech. You won't be allowed to criticize Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or the left. You won't be able to speak out in defense of Donald Trump because that's violence, they'll tell us. And we don't allow violence in our country. We have a nation of law and order, they'll tell us. And if you commit that violence, they will portray you as a terrorist. And so all of our rights, one by one, will be taken away. Our right to free speech, our right to freedom of the press, our right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, our right to peaceably assemble, our right to keep and bear arms, our right to due process under the law, one by one. They will go down the list and their crackdown will begin. And the result of it, if they succeed, will be utter tyranny. And Joe Biden is just admitting this to us again. Their strategy has not changed. This story, an organ donor in the state of Kentucky, a 34-year-old, woke up during surgery to remove his organs. This story is hard to believe that it's true. It's so grisly. The guy's name is TJ Hoover. At the time that this happened, just over 3 years ago, or almost exactly 3 years ago, he was 34 years old. A 34-year-old, he had overdosed and was declared by doctors to be brain dead. On the back of his driver's license, you know how you can check that organ donor box or not? And you're shamed if you don't, by the way. And I know this because I got into an argument with a family member of mine a couple years ago because I unchecked the organ donor box. And my family member said, hey, don't you care about people? And I said, well, yes, I do. But the organ donation industry is rife with corruption and a complete lack of ethics. And I think that this story exemplifies that perfectly. So TJ Hoover had overdosed on drugs. He was declared brain dead by doctors. Because he had checked that organ donor box, he was then slated to undergo surgery to remove his organs to be given to someone else. But that's not what happened. During the surgery, after he'd been wheeled into the operating room, he began to flutter his eyes. He began to move about. And when he began to move, people in the operating room noticed, but they were told, actually, this is just a reflex. The guy's not alive. This is just a reflex. But then he started to actually make eye contact to track things with his eyes, and he began to cry. He began to try to pull at his own teeth. And it was at that moment that they said, actually, we can't take this guy's organs out. He's alive. This is what his sister had to say about what happened. Take a listen.
We were told TJ had no reflexes, no responses, no brain waves, no brain activity. And we were told that the 26th, the 27th, 28th, and 29th. And the 27th, we made the decision as a family to remove him from life support because, you know, he was brain dead. We had his honor walk, but almost as soon as his honor walk started, his eyes started opening, and not just opening, he was tracking around looking to see, you know, what was going on. And we were told that was just reflexes, just a normal instinct. He's not there. It's a matter of life and death. You know, it's more than frustration. I feel like they were trying to choose my brother. They were going to sacrifice my brother's life to save how many ever other people. The more that comes out, it's still shocking for me, and I'm living it. You know, so it's everyone else's story. It's our reality. And it's shocking to hear some of what he went through.
It's not only shocking, it's grisly. And when I heard this story, I thought, how often does this happen? Surely this is an anomaly. Surely this is not something that happens on a regular basis. Well, let me back up for a second. The reason that this story came out now, it's 2024. It's October of 2024. This happened in October of 2021. So why are we just hearing about this story now? Well, the reason is because on October 11th, of this year, of 2024, there was a congressional hearing about the organ donation industry because it is reportedly rife with corruption. So here's the surgeon-in-chief at Vanderbilt University Medical during this testimony. His name is Seth Karp. He said, the problem is that we've got 40 years where it, meaning the organ donation industry, has had no oversight at all. No oversight. He said, this has led to poor education, poor standard of practice, and poorly trained people. Bloomberg also reported on this congressional hearing and said allegations of the program's failings that were aired at the hearing included stories of presumably brain-dead organ donors who were found to be still alive as surgeons prepared to remove their organs. So it didn't just happen to TJ Hoover. This is not an anomaly. This is something that happens on a regular basis. Robert Cannon, associate professor of surgery at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, said in testimony about one particular incident, he said, no one really knew what to do. He said an administrator at an unnamed hospital said it was likely a brainstem reflex that made a patient appear to be breathing as this patient was being prepared to have their organs removed. The official from the hospital recommended that the team of surgeons proceed with the organ removal, even though the patient appeared to be breathing. And Cannon said, which of course would have been murder if we had done so. So yes, we closed the patient. They had already begun the surgery and we got out of Dodge. We wanted nothing to do with this. The patient was later declared brain dead, but when Cannon, this doctor, was again asked several days later to harvest the same patient's organs, he said he declined. How creepy is this? So the story of TJ Hoover is horrifying, but is it an anomaly? It doesn't seem like it's an anomaly according to this congressional hearing. So here's the thing. What does brain dead actually mean? This is a term that is extremely nebulous, and I think that we should start looking into it as the American public. If a person is going to undergo surgery for organ removal, they do so if this person has been declared dead. It's called the dead donor rule. But it doesn't mean like stiff and blue and cold, which is what used to be the definition of death. This new definition of death is called brain dead, and you're actually not stiff, you're not cold, and you're not blue if you're brain dead. There was an article in 2008 in the New England Journal of Medicine that talked about this redefinition of death and how it impacts the organ donation industry, and it's really chilling. This is what it says. Since its inception, organ transplantation has been guided by the overarching ethical requirement known as the dead donor rule, which simply states that patients must be declared dead before the removal of any vital organs for transplantation. Before the development of modern critical care, the diagnosis of death was relatively straightforward. Patients were dead when they were cold, blue, and stiff. Unfortunately, organs from these traditional cadavers cannot be used for transplantation. 40 years ago, an ad hoc committee at Harvard Medical School, gosh, of course it was Harvard, chaired by Henry Beecher, suggested revising the definition of death in a way that would make some patients with devastating neurologic injuries suitable for organ transplantation under the dead donor rule. Oh my gosh, you guys, they've not just redefined what marriage is. They've not just redefined what a man is. They've redefined what being dead is. These people actually aren't dead. This is what the journal says. The concept of brain death has served us well and has been the ethical and legal justification for thousands of life-saving donations and transplantations. Even so, there have been persistent questions about whether patients with massive brain injury, apnea, and loss of brainstem reflexes are really dead. After all, when the injury is entirely intracranial, these patients look very much alive. They're warm and pink. They digest and metabolize food. They excrete waste. They undergo sexual maturation, and they can even reproduce. To a casual observer, they look just like patients who are receiving long-term artificial ventilation and are asleep. The article goes on, how creepy is this though? The article goes on to say, the arguments about why these patients should be considered dead has never been fully convincing. The definition of brain death requires the complete absence of all functions of the entire brain, yet many of these patients retain essential neurologic functions such as the regulated secretion of hypothalamic hormones. Some have argued that these patients are dead because they are permanently unconscious, which is true, but if this is justification, then patients in a permanent vegetative state who breathe spontaneously should also be diagnosed as dead, a characterization that most regard as implausible. Others have claimed that brain-dead patients are dead because their brain damage has led to a permanent cessation of functioning as an organism as a whole. Yet, evidence shows that if these patients are supported beyond the acute phase of their illness, which is rarely done, they can survive for many years. They conclude by saying, the uncomfortable conclusion to be drawn from this literature is that although it may be perfectly ethical to remove vital organs for transplantation from patients who satisfy the diagnostic criteria of brain death, the reason it's ethical cannot be that we are convinced that they are really dead. Are you getting chills up your arms right now? This is what it comes down to, my friends. Do you trust the medical experts? Do you trust them to be ethical with you and your body, or your family member and their body? These are the same medical experts, I would remind you, that think abortion is ethical, that think it's ethical to trans children, give them puberty blocking medication, cross-sex hormones, and ultimately genital mutilation surgery. These are the same medical experts that presided over the COVID abuse, whether this was ventilators, whether this was remdesivir, whether this was forced vaccination, whether this was depriving people of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Do you trust the same medical experts that tell us that childhood vaccines are totally safe? Not at all related to the epidemic of chronic childhood illness and autism. Do you trust the medical experts that are so tied with politicians that they sometimes become politicians and then go back to Big Pharma to make money? These are the same medical experts. And they're the ones that redefined the word dead in order to harvest people's organs. Something tells me that this is one of those situations where a lot of us watching this show and our family members automatically check that box on our driver's license saying, sure, I'll be a organ donor. That sounds like, if I get into a terrible car accident, that sounds like a great way to save someone else's life. But something tells me that this is one of those topics that is suddenly going to cause people to open their eyes and say, wait a second, is this actually what it's being portrayed to be? Or is this one of those topics, like vaccines, maybe even like in vitro fertilization, that isn't what many of us have believed for a really long time? I'll tell you, I'm awfully glad that several years ago I unchecked that organ donation box, because this is grisly. All right, we've got a new segment for you today. It's called the Shocking Numbers segment. And the reason it's called the Shocking Numbers segment is because these numbers are super shocking. Wait till you hear these. A United Nations report found that female athletes around the globe have lost nearly 900 medals to men who identify as women who were competing in women's sports. This is from the New York Post. According to this report by the UN that was appropriately named Violence Against Women and Girls in Sports, by the 30th of March, 2024, over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports. Even the United Nations, which I would argue is one of the most corrupt globalist institutions on the planet, concluded that, quote, the replacement of the female sports category with a mixed sex category has resulted in an increasing number of female athletes losing opportunities, including medals, when competing against males. First of all, I guess kudos to the UN. This is a surprise from them, but I'll give credit where credit is due. Kudos to the UN for actually calling this out. But remember that when you challenge the other side, and you've probably experienced this in your own life, when you challenge the other side and say, do you actually think it's fair that, Leah Thomas, formerly Will Thomas, defeated Riley Gaines in swimming because Leah Thomas is so obviously biologically male? They oftentimes, the other side will say, this never happens. You're making up a wild hypothetical. Well, the United Nations says, no, this is not wildly hypothetical, that women have lost almost 900 medals in 29 different sports around the globe to biological men pretending to be women. Absolutely shocking. All right, up in Canada, there's a program, an assisted suicide program. They call it their MAID program, MAID program. And it's been in effect for a couple of years. We've been keeping an eye on it because, as you know, the United States oftentimes follows in the pseudo-socialist programs of European countries like Great Britain or even the Scandinavian countries, and oftentimes copies Canada's social programs as well. So what's happening in Canada could very well happen here in the United States. This number was floating around X today, and I could not believe it. I had to verify it for myself. But this program called MAID, it stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. It's just euthanasia. It's awful. It was passed in 2016, and since then, guess how many people have been killed by this program? 45,000 people have been killed by the assisted suicide program in Canada. In 2023, City Journal reported, and I quote, more than 13,000 people in Canada were euthanized in 2022. That's an annual rise of 31.2% since 2021. In 2022, 4.1% of all deaths in Canada were the result of euthanasia. MAID, the Medical Assistance in Dying program, could now be listed as the nation's 5th leading cause of death. 45,000 people. And this is not just for deadly diseases or end-of-life care. Not that that would be any justification. You can sign up for this for practically any reason. It is state-sanctioned suicide. 45,000 people. That is, if you'd like to conceptualize that number, more than the capacity of the 2 largest hockey stadiums in Canada. If you combined Bell Centre and Scotiabank Saddledome, all the people in both of those stadiums at the same time, 45,000 people being killed by the assisted suicide program is more than the capacity of those 2 stadiums combined. Meanwhile, over on TikTok, and you know I feel the same way about TikTok that you do, but did you know that Gen Z and millennials, the primary source of news is TikTok? Yeah, conservatives, I argue, should compete more on TikTok. Not because TikTok is good, it's bad. It shortens people's attention spans, and it's obviously used to infiltrate the minds of American youth by Chinese communists and other woke ideological forces. But all that to be said is, if woke ideological forces and the Chinese Communist Party are trying to warp young people's minds, then conservatives should at least compete over there. Otherwise, it's going to be blanket indoctrination, and we are not going to have made a dent in the minds of American youth. Well, President Trump is actually over on TikTok as well. And since President Trump went to McDonald's, his TikTok account has received nearly 300 million views. How crazy is that? The Trump team knows what's what because a new Pew poll recently found that here's the actual number. 39% of adults under 30 say they regularly get their news from TikTok. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. TikTok users are more likely to get news from TikTok than Facebook users are to get news from Facebook. That is also according to Pew. So it's both savvy and smart for the Trump campaign to be there, but how savvy and how smart was it for President Trump to go to McDonald's? I would argue it is close to the smartest move that his campaign has made this cycle, and that's a hard competition. All right, the final shocking number of the day. We talked on Monday about the different states, the different swing states across the United States that are claiming they're not going to tabulate votes by election day. They're claiming it's going to be delayed, that the results aren't going to be in until later that week or several days later. We're talking Arizona, we're talking Pennsylvania, we're talking Michigan, we're talking Georgia, but in a specific county in Arizona that is known for being rife with fraud, I'm talking about Maricopa County, they are now saying that it's going to take them between 10 and 13 days to tabulate votes. This is from a local NBC News affiliate. Quote, in Maricopa County, election officials are asking for patience as votes are tabulated, which could take 10 to 13 days because of the longer than typical ballots and the high interest in this year's election. This, according to Jennifer Luer, who is the deputy elections director. She said, we want to make sure that this is a secure process, but we also want to make sure that it's an accurate process. I'm sorry, I don't understand this. Are we talking about the United States of America? This isn't even a single state. This is a single county in a single state. I could go to Maricopa County myself, one person, and I could hand count ballots, the entirety of the county's ballots, in less time than 10 to 13 days. How on earth is a team of election officials unable to do that in less time than 2 weeks? Well, the answer to that, of course, is that they're planning to cheat. There's no other explanation, even incompetence, even my belief that nothing is more incompetent than the federal government, or I guess in this case, local government. My belief in the incompetence of government doesn't even hold water here because this is so incompetent, it's simply not believable. The only explanation is that they are leaving themselves 13 days to cheat. I actually volunteer. I'd like to volunteer to Maricopa County. I will come down. I will buy my own plane ticket. I will pay for my own hotel stay. I will stay up day and night and hand count all of your ballots in less than 10 to 13 days. And then I will recount all of your ballots to make sure that I was accurate in my first count. Just me, one person, and it will take me significantly less time than 10 to 13 days. Actually, there's one more shocking number that you should know about before we go. The New York Times is now reporting that Bill Gates is using a nonprofit organization to donate $50 million to Kamala Harris. So, as you know, individuals aren't allowed to donate that much. So he's using this little shell nonprofit to give Kamala Harris $50 million. And I wonder why. Bill Gates has a lot to hide, doesn't he? He certainly doesn't want RFK Jr. to be part of the Trump administration to expose his collusion with the CDC and the FDA. He certainly doesn't want Trump to expose the Epstein list, which Trump has promised to do. And he definitely doesn't want Trump to be as based as Trump has been about fighting against, or actually J.D. Vance has been the real based one, fighting against the bogus climate agenda. And so Bill Gates is giving $50 million to Kamala Harris because he is a frightened little coward who knows that the days that the truth is hidden are numbered. And that is our shocking numbers segment for the day. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.